Boa tarde. É um prazer receber o professor Richard Falk em mais uma sessão do Fórum Permanente sobre Genocídios e Crimes contra a Humanidade, formado por três institutos ou colégios, né, da Universidade de São Paulo, ou seja, o Instituto de Relações Internacionais, a Faculdade de Direito e a Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas, representada então por nós que estamos aqui, professor Paulo Borba Casella, professor titular da Faculdade de Direito da USP, professor Arthur Capella Giannatasio, professor de Relações Internacionais, e eu mesma, Arlene Clemens, professora de Letras Orientais, professora de História Árabe nas Letras Orientais da Faculdade de Filosofia, Letras e Ciências Humanas. Eu vou agora passar para o inglês para dar as boas-vindas para o nosso convidado. So I'm sorry for this brief introduction in Portuguese, Professor Richard Falk. I was simply presenting the members of the forum. And now I'd really like to thank you very much, Professor Richard, for joining us at this session, for accepting our invitation. It's an immense honor to have you here. And I'd like to begin then presenting Professor Richard Falk. He's the Emeritus Professor of International Law at Princeton University and president of the Council of Curators of the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor. He was also the special rapporteur on the situation of the violation of human rights in Palestine for several years, with very important reports coming out relating to apartheid and so on. And he is, I would finally like to say, he's the co-editor of this book, together with the former Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoglu. I don't know if you can see the book, I guess so. And it's really an amazing book that has come out in English recently, edited then by Professor Richard Falk together with Mr. Ahmet Davutoglu. And he's the president of the Gaza People's Tribunal, who has just finished, had its final session in October last year. So Professor Richard, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us for this informal conversation together with the public here in Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arlene, very much. It's an honor for me to be here as a guest of the forum, whose perspective is very congenial to my own, and whose focus on genocide and crimes against humanity seems to be essential at this historic juncture in world history, one that has many reasons to be troublesome for those who look toward a more peaceful and just world order. We're at a point of, I wouldn't even call it a crossroads or fork in the road. It's a downward swerve that is bringing us to a very low point in the nature of the global order that was designed after World War II, that had its own list of deficiencies associated with it. And many of those deficiencies became manifest in what has been happening in Gaza for over the past 2+ years. In other words, what happened, in my judgment, in Gaza was not a failure of international law, that was rather clear about the nature of the crimes that Israel and the complicit countries, the most important of which was my own, the United States, were associated with. It was a real repudiation of any kind of respect for international law by the decision-making political organs of the UN. In other words, the judicial organs had upheld international law in a professionally rather impressive way, with several judges voting against the foreign policy of their native countries. And so the deficiency that was exposed by allowing this genocide to continue was a product of creating a world order after 1945 that was designed to serve the interests of the winners of the war. It was a, a critical view of the UN Charter and the continued hold of the ideology of political realism on the foreign policy thinking of the important countries of the world suggested that what was hoped for in the future was a hybrid world order where the secondary countries of the world would be subject to a legal framework that was spelled out in the Charter, but this framework was not intended to override the discretionary foreign policy of the five winning states who were made permanent members of the Security Council and given the power of decision without any limitations, any operational limitations. So what that meant in effect was that there was a dependence on the geopolitical self-restraint of those five countries, two of which were imperial, European colonial, imperial or colonial powers, and two of which were countries that rejected Western liberal values. So it was this group of five countries created a hegemonic world order in which they were privileged in several ways, including an exemption from having international law enforced or against them, or having notions of accountability applied to their behavior, even if it encroached upon such fundamental norms as the prohibition of genocide and the prohibition of aggressive war. What we saw, I think, during the Cold War was the erosion of liberal Western values under the pressure of this rivalry with the Soviet-led socialist, radical socialist, or state socialist, or communist portion of the world. What was done by the liberal West in this period was, to the extent possible, done covertly. through the CIA and through kind of indirect interventions that were inhibited to some extent by a desire to project the West as concerned with upholding internationalism and international law. And I think Vietnam was a turning point. The Vietnam War in the late 19s, well, mid 1960s to early 1970s showed that the U.S., while it supported the tendency toward liberation of colonial Asia from the European control, when it came to its own perception of global interests, it was prepared to override the constraints, the most clear constraints of the UN Charter and of contemporary international law. And it was intent on frustrating the nationalism of the peoples of Indochina. And this was overt, as distinct, for instance, from the Iranian Revolution of 1953, the Iranian coup of 1953, where a nationalist elected leader, Mossadegh, was overthrown in a coup openly, which is sort of a contradiction in words, openly supported by the CIA and run in the early stages of the restoration of the Shah's regime by the American ambassador in Tehran, who happened to be the former director of the CIA. So, in one sense, the support of whatever Israel wants to do to the Palestinians represents this earlier disposition of privileged outlook for those countries, those few countries that qualified as the principal winners of World War II. That kind of immunity and the legitimacy of this order depended in part on hiding these elements of not really serving the global public good, but of pursuing a geopolitical agenda that was formulated in terms of a belief that the world history is shaped by hard power superiority. I think the militarism, there are other options for geopolitics than this militarism that has characterized the behavior of these geopolitical actors ever since 1945. And the Trump emergence as a leader who seems to want to create a new framework of relations between these geopolitical powers outside the structure of the UN. In other words, I think from the first term to the present, Trump's real transactional vision has been one of creating a world order in which China, Russia, and the US have a trilateral sort of dominance over the management of global security. See, and in that sense, international law persists as a strong dimension of international relations that operates to govern routine interactions, whether they involve the exchange of ambassadors or maritime and air safety or most commercial and trade transactions. These are all rather effectively regulated by international law. It's in the area of global security, which encompasses genocide and crimes against humanity, where the burden of enforcement and accountability was subject to this kind of winner's framing of world order in 1945. And that framing was not limited just to the UN Charter. For instance, the Nuremberg trials of the surviving Nazi political and military figures was based on a winner's conception of criminal accountability. A crime second only perhaps to the Holocaust was the dropping of atomic bombs on Japanese cities and the firebombing of the cities, the strategic bombing of Dresden and other parts of Germany, which were designed not to deal with military opposition, but were essentially used as weapons of terror. But the main point is that it was seen as a geopolitically framed notion of accountability. The losers are accountable, the winners are enjoy impunity. And that was a really important aspect of the way in which World War II morphed or was transformed into a so-called New World Order. Another aspect of this was the way nuclear weapons were treated. In the end, the political realists won the political game and defeated what had been early popular support for nuclear disarmament. And that defeat meant not only would countries that acquired these nuclear weapons have discretion over how they might be used in for their security or for their strategic ambitions, but it was a secret and completely unreviewable kind of authority that these nuclear powers insisted upon for themselves, and was kind of vindicated geopolitically by their being the first 5 countries to acquire nuclear weapons. And then what was done to solidify their political role was to shape a bargain that was embodied in the Non-Proliferation Treaty that was supposedly an exchange on the part of the non-nuclear states for giving up their option to acquire nuclear weapons in exchange for a commitment by the nuclear states to seek in good faith nuclear disarmament. Now, they never had the idea of being bound by that article of the treaty, and the most material aspect of the bargain between the nuclear and the non-nuclear world. They, in more guarded circles, such as I heard at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City, they referred to this Article 6, which pledged the nuclear powers to disarmament, to they characterized it as a useful fiction. In other words, as something that would induce countries to join the non-proliferation regime without inhibiting the nuclearism of those nuclear powers. See, and that again is this kind of two-tiered world where you have on the one side a nuclear oligopoly and reinforced by this non-proliferation regime, which in its application, for instance, to countries like Libya and now Iran, is in effect a mandate to wage war against those that try to break into the nuclear club, so to speak. And on the other side, it's even the non-proliferation regime is not applied in an equitable manner. Israel was facilitated in becoming a nuclear weapon state by members, by several of the members, Western members of the geopolitical order that was embodied in the UN. So you had a discriminatory hegemony that still is in control, prepared to go to war against Iran if it acquires nuclear weapons, yet enabling a country like Israel that has waged war against several of its neighbors, aggressive war, for which it had no legal or moral mandate, and genocidal war or combat tactics against the Palestinians without any kind of effective pushback. In other words, the global South has focused, as is natural, on developmental priorities and on somehow addressing internal conflicts and the residues of colonialism, especially in Africa, parts of Asia, and to some extent in Latin America, and has not challenged this way of ordering international relations in any effective way, even when genocide is being perpetrated and aggressive war and other crimes against humanity are taking place. And that represents, it seems to me, a systemic failure in 1945 that was somewhat obscured by the Cold War preoccupations, and then succeeded by an era of what I would call and have called predatory globalization, where again the market was manipulated by these dominant countries in order to facilitate their economic prosperity and limit the opportunities of the global South. And although there have been some signs of a move toward a polycentric world order, such as the formation of the BRICS and in the Gaza context, the Hague group of countries that offered an alternative vision of what was appropriate to the Chinese efforts at creating an alternative framing for economic cooperation and development. But none of these, as is evident recently, has been able to challenge this primacy of geopolitics and the uninhibited revival of economic imperialism by the Trump presidency, dramatized, of course, in recent days by the Venezuelan aggressive intervention and an undisguised repudiation of one of the what I would call the pillars of international liberalism, which was the adoption of the resolution in the UN of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. And I think Venezuela represents a repudiation of that milestone, second only to the right of self-determination, which also was repudiated in the course of the struggle between Israel and Palestine, and exposed the deficiencies of what was created in 1945. And those deficiencies have been aggravated by the recent U.S. diplomacy, first in the Middle East, second now in Latin America, and in its essence, really, saying that only the U.S. knows how to run the world, and one of the ways is to repudiate liberal internationalism. So it's withdrawn from all sorts of international arrangements, including climate change and many of the really positive contributions of the UN, such as UNESCO, Human Rights Council, and underfunding other parts of the organization. In other words, it's a retreat from any kind of cooperative international order to one that depends on the supposed wisdom of Washington and a kind of we know best attitude toward the rest of the world. And this has had, in the Gaza genocide context, this had this special feature of being a Western liberal civilizational endorsement of genocide that united the complicit countries who were all Western breakaway British colonial states, such as US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as the former European colonial powers of UK, France, and tacitly Germany. This kind of consensus was resisted by Iran and Islamic movements, but not by the Arab governments that were, in their own way, complicit with the perpetuation of genocide and endorsed now through this Gaza peace plan a framework that clearly was shaped by Israel and the US and designed to reward those that perpetrated genocide and to victimize those that suffered from genocide and are continuing to suffer from genocide, so that it is a exaggerated embodiment of the legal and moral deficiencies of the global order that was shaped in 1945. It was these deficiencies that induced us to form the global, the Gaza Tribunal, also known as the Gaza People's Tribunal, that had its final session, as Arlene noted, in her most gracious introduction, uh, the, it was there shaped in a way that was an effort to engage in symbolic politics to mobilize more solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. It was, the Gaza Tribunal never sought to be a traditional court. It proceeded from a partisan set of assumptions that genocide had occurred and was occurring and needed to be documented and needed to be reacted to by the popular forces of civil society, not depending on the geopolitical uh, uh, empathy of powerful governments or governments interested in their own national interests and not prepared to make any kind of sacrifice to stop genocide elsewhere. And the US set the standard for this in its reaction to the Rwanda genocide of 1994, where the Clinton presidency, supposedly liberal, prohibited even the use of the word genocide among anyone connected with the US government because it would create pressure to protect the people of Rwanda, and the US didn't want to intervene where it had no economic interests of any consequence, and therefore didn't want that kind of pressure to uphold its never again pledge, or a pledge that it had joined with the other winners of World War II in making. So it tried to form a more realistic image of the actuality of genocide than was provided by the most influential media platforms in the world, with possible exception of Al Jazeera and some in the Middle East and maybe in other parts of the world. But the the essence of what was done throughout this tribunal process was both to strengthen the will of civil society to act where governments had failed to act as a force for genocide prevention and a pressure for universalizing standards of accountability for behavior. And I think it played a small part in creating this kind of moral legal consensus. This was a tribunal that aimed not so much at clarifying law, but at promoting justice. And to do this, it operated through a jury of conscience. And so it was really a court of justice, not a court of law. And that meant it could consider elements of the situation beyond the technical constraints of law, even as it operated impressively in the arenas set by the International Criminal Court, and even more so by the UN Tribunal, the International Criminal Court, I mean, the International Court of Justice. So, what this tribunal was seeking to do with respect to international law was to use it to as a source of legitimating civil activism in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And that kind of effort at identifying what makes the use of force illegitimate or lacking legitimacy is very important, had been very important in shaping the outcome of anti-colonial wars. It wasn't the side with the superior military power. It was the side that won what I call the legitimacy war over occupying the high moral and legal ground. And all the anti-colonial wars, including Vietnam, were won by the weaker side militarily, but the stronger side from the perspective of legitimacy. And that's a very, I think, important reality that the governments of the West, and particularly the US, cannot learn that lesson that should have been learned in Vietnam and the other anti-colonial wars. It can't learn it because of the power of its domestic arms industry. In other words, it's captive, the government policy and ideology is captive to the militarism that's been built into the bureaucracy during the Cold War and high peacetime military budgets, and by the private sector militarism that exaggerates international security threats and continues to fund a unnecessarily large military budget. And we're now in a phase where, again, many governments are expanding their military expenditures. So let me conclude these introductory and somewhat rambling remarks by saying that I think it is up to the global South at this point to mobilize even more strongly against the genocide wherever it occurs, and to be a force of resistance to the commission of crimes against humanity. And in the Latin American context, the renewal and extension of the Monroe Doctrine makes this, it seems to me, a matter of continental urgency, that this new set of circumstances where national sovereignty is subordinated to this geopolitical hegemony is something that is intolerable in a world that's threatened in all sorts of ways that require respect for the vitality of national and regional autonomy. So let me stop there and welcome our discussion.
Well, thank you very much. Those were the most enlightening inaugural rumblings I've ever heard. So I'd like to, well, I have several questions of my own. I'd like to say something very rapidly that we were very happy to have, in my opinion, organized this session and for you accepting this invitation before, when we could not even imagine that an invasion such as which occurred of Venezuela would happen, and that we're now able to meet here in these circumstances to be able to reflect also on that. Following and still with the genocide in Gaza unfolding, because it actually has not finished. I'd first like to invite first Professor Artur and then Professor Paulo Casella for their questions.
Thank you, Professor Ellen. Thank you, Professor Richard Falk. Just as I said, it was an honor, and I'll never be disappointed with your presentation, just as we discussed earlier. It's not a question exactly, it's only a commentary. I really got interested in your discourse and your commentaries about of understanding the UN and its legal framework as somehow a legal framework designed for the winners and not for the losers, the losers being accountable and the winners being immunized by international legal order. So this is precisely what I have been thinking when I develop my critical legal studies on international law. So I'm just really excited and enthusiastic about this kind of reading of the acts. So just as only a commentary to thank you for your presentation and for to know. I'm really excited to read a little bit more about your of this perspective that you presented to us. Thank you. Just a compliment.
Thank you very much. I think it is very important to understand the present realities partly through this prism of what was done in 1945. I mean, this is a new phase of a winner's world, and whether there's resistance sufficient. I mean, what resistance did occur during the Israel genocide came from the global South. There's no question that South Africa and the Hague Group is dominated by progressive elements in the global South, and it's symbolically important that South Africa took the lead in submitting the claims about the violation of the Genocide Convention to the ICJ. I think that was symbolically very important, and it shouldn't be forgotten that in addition to genocide, there was a preceding apartheid that was the basis of governance of the occupied Palestinian territories and was part of the reason that the ICJ, in its advisory opinion of July 19th, 2024, declared Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, including Gaza, to be unlawful and should be abruptly terminated within 1 year, which was endorsed by the General Assembly. That year has elapsed, yet nothing has happened. See, and that's the problematique, so to speak, of this way in which international relations is developing at this time.
Paulo.
Thank you so much, Professor Falk, for your lecture. It was enlightening. And it is something that you probably see this happening in other countries as well. But this has been recurring in Brazil, that any criticism presented against the measures adopted by the government of Israel is immediately taxed as anti-Semitism. So it is an attempt to prevent any criticism from being voiced, notwithstanding the evidence of genocide and the use of withholding humanitarian aid, food, water, energy, this as strategies of war. And also, as you just mentioned in the replying to Artur's comment, that the additional legal opinion of 2024 on the West Bank, it has been not only not discontinued, but they are moving forward. So they are the remaining Palestinian areas of the West Bank are being cleared up by the colonists and the support of the Israel Defense Forces. So this is something which it is several times we have experienced that voicing any criticism against the violations of international law and humanitarian law by Israel is immediately labeled anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Professor Caselli, for the question and the comments. The weaponization of anti-Semitism became a very active strategy of Israel and its various Zionist support groups around the world as a way of deflecting attention from the criminality of the way in which Israel was treating the Palestinians. And before, and I was personally a target of this early weaponization when I was special rapporteur between the years 2008 and 2014, where I think Israel discovered and these pro-Israeli lobbying and pressure groups discovered that this was an effective way of practicing what I call the politics of deflection. Instead of looking at the violations of international criminal law, you look at the credibility of the messenger who brings that message, and you divert attention. Is that person credible or not? Or is that allegation credible or not? Rather than looking at the survivor testimony that's overwhelmingly convincing if you respect the evidence that's available. And I think one of the contributions that will be made when the written proceedings of the Gaza Tribunal are published is to make even less credible the use of this tactic of demonizing those that call attention to genocide rather than to the perpetrators of genocide. See, it's a real reversal of accountability. And it's been taken to an extreme in the relationship to the special rapporteurs on Palestine of the UN. And unfortunately, Francesca Albanese has been in the eye of the storm and has been victimized rather than praised by being sanctioned unlawfully by the US government, which bars her entry into the US and freezes her assets and really her relationships with anyone that in any way can be seen as helping her. I mean, she is an unpaid civil servant that is courageous, that was courageous and is courageously telling the world what has happened in Gaza and detailing in an authoritative way the elements of genocide that have characterized the last post-October 7th 2 years. And her kind of making her into she's sort of a demon for the US government and Israel, of course, and a kind of second coming of Joan of Arc for the rest of the world. And in that sense, it's it's terrible for her, but it's a mixed message to the world. She would have been a very much more popular Nobel Peace recipient than the Venezuelan opposition leader Machado. But it expresses this terribly regressive punishment of those that are trying to do what the UN was supposed to be doing and what international prescribes. So it's worse than impunity. It's shifting punity or accountability to the most conscientious voices of conscience and truth. See, and it's part of a war Trump is waging in a number of different arenas, a war against Enlightenment values. It's not only going back to the what was done in 1945, it goes back centuries to the rise of science, rationality, the formulated mode of governance. And it's very dismissive of experts, as in the anti-Semitism has been used, for instance, to discredit Jeremy Corbyn in the UK as a pro-Palestinian political figure and to demonize him as an anti-Semite. And it's so far from the truth. See, truth doesn't matter in this crusade of making people think that critics of Israel are anti-Semites. Truth has no standing. What is valued is how much mud you can throw at a particular target. And Israel is very skilled at doing this, and it has these allies in the liberal West. And I think the other point about that Professor Carrillo mentioned that's important is that Israel not only has defied the ICJ's advisory opinion on the occupation, it has gone in the other direction, expanding the unlawful settlements, tolerating, even encouraging settler violence to make the West Bank unlivable for Palestinians, and engaging in direct military operations against West Bank refugee camps. The whole thing is part of a Zionist project to establish the so-called Greater Israel from the river to the sea, a one-state solution that excludes Palestinian participation and involves either the expulsion of Palestinians or their continued exploitative subjugation. So the Palestinians are in a terrible situation where, as suggested, the genocide is not complete. It's a mistake to say after genocide, because it's Palestinian people are suffering a slowed down version. Israel attacks whenever it wants and kills people, kills over 500 people by now, and the U.S. Equates Hamas violations with Israel's conduct and basically approves of Israel's actions as mere reactions to Hamas. And what Hamas is accused of doing is failing to return some difficult to obtain remains of dead Israelis, people who died in Gaza during the past 2 years, since October 7th. So we see a completely defiant U.S.-Israel, basically Western attitude. And one of the things in the background is that Israel is the only Middle Eastern partner that provides a reliable grounding of regional energy geopolitics for the West. And it's notable that these interventions, going back to the Iranian restoration of the Shah in 1953 and forward to the Venezuelan aggression a few days ago is that they are motivated by, in both these cases, by oil and American corporate interests in oil, and they are really repudiations of this key milestone of permanent sovereignty over natural resources. See, it's an attempt to repudiate that kind of post-colonial, post-Monroe Doctrine vision of stable economic and political relations. Of course, they were never stable in a full sense. The Pinochet intervention in 1973 was also motivated by a mixture of political hostility to the socialism of the Allende government and the economic interests of the so-called Chicago boys, the Latin American wing of economic globalization. So in a way, again, this is nothing new. It's just more brazen and more shocking to the systemic assumptions of what the normative order of the world is and should be.
Thank you very much. Well, as I said, I do have many questions. I don't want to tire you. I think I'll just try to put like two very, I'll try to put them objectively, if that is possible. The first one is, more straightforwardly, how would you, I mean, as a historian, I characterize what happened now with the US invading Venezuela to capture his president, the president of the country, as an act of imperialism. You know, it's an act of imperialism, as you were saying, with interest in the oil and of asserting its own influence exclusively in the continents, et cetera, et cetera. In international law is my question, and how international law relates to how this is being elaborated inside the US law. Is there or are there any grounds in international law that may be used by the United States to its advantage to justify in any way what it did in Venezuela? Can this eventually be elaborated in legal terms in a way that is accepted? The first thing. The second question then is something that I have been long thinking about, and I would really like to hear your view, because you've spoken very much in this regard. We have heard a lot recently for the past 2 years of how international law and the world order are being eroded by the Gaza genocide, by the Israeli genocide in Gaza. Do you agree with that? Or would you go as far as to saying that the genocide and the way the world has accepted the genocide to unfold is actually eroding a world order that existed based on international law? Or do you actually assert the line of reasoning that you have exposed from the beginning of your talk today, to say that actually what is happening is that the failure of the international order is being exposed, and not what is happening is not actually eroding anything. It was already eroded, or let's say it already had its failures, it already had its fissures. And also, when we speak from the third world, today the global south or whatever, we've always known that international law was made by Europe for Europe, and it has always had to be asserted by force and pressure and popular pressure. For us, for us in Brazil, in the South, it has never been there. We have never taken it for granted. It has always had to be politically and motivated by moral pressure of the people, has to be enforced. So I have always tended to doubt a bit when this discourse for the past 2 years is put out there that the Gaza genocide is eroding something important. So how would you elaborate that actually? Is there anything that has been eroded, or has it been simply exposed?
No, that's a very interesting set of questions. So that I don't forget, I would suggest that all people interested in what is happening in Venezuela and more generally in the world should read carefully the national security strategy of the U.S. document that was released in December of 2025, just a few weeks ago, because it sort of tries to generate a not see it doesn't it doesn't want to be seen as respecting international law, so it doesn't put its rationale in terms of law, but it puts it in terms of responsibility and anti-drug, and it everything but natural resources. I mean, it doesn't acknowledge that motivation. It pretends to be pro-democracy and hides behind the fact that the Venezuelan election was tampered with, that the opposition really had won, that Maduro was not a really legitimate head of state. I mean, as you know, good lawyers can find a legal argument for any position if they're paid enough, and law does not can either itself be infected by the privileges of the powerful. And as you point out, international law was really evolved to enable the domination of the non-European world and as a framework for global colonialism, which included the Western Hemisphere at its early stage. So that this document also is important because it criticizes past U.S. foreign policies as not thinking enough about American economic and security interests and trying to govern the world. And it places Latin America in the most what one would say priority in terms of this new Trumpian type of international order, which can be seen also as an indirect precedent beneficial to Russia and China, because of what is good for Venezuela, as decided by Washington, is also as good for Ukraine as decided in Moscow, or Taiwan as decided in Beijing. So one creates a geopolitical framework that really repudiates the autonomy of ordinary states, of the other 190 some states. They are not are more in the more put in a position of being dependent protectorates rather than independent political actors. And that's really a step back from what was projected in 1945, where at least the overt ideology of the liberal West was respect for territorial and economic sovereignty. But now one's gone back to this system of patronage and partnership with national elites that are exploiting the people. And the pro-democracy sentiments are another version of weaponizing anti-Semitism. In this way, you're weaponizing democracy and saying you're getting rid of Maduro and his wife because you believe in democracy. And as even mainstream media critics like Thomas Friedman are now saying, it's all about oil, it's nothing about democracy. And in that sense, it is a matter of exposing what is happening. And that was, I think, certainly a way of describing what we attempted with the Gaza Tribunal and with the Gaza group who produced the book that you contributed so admirably to, that we did after the meeting in London. So there is this reawakening of people of conscience, of the need for the promotion of a normative order that protects the global public good instead of one that follows the strategic interests of these five World War II winners. And of course, even though those are the five that are identified, other countries will certainly be willing to act in the same manner in their relations within their regions, or especially if they have an ally among the permanent five in the Security Council. So we're living in a world that has changed quite a bit in this period, and I think it's whether, as you suggest, one should think of international law and world order as eroded or exposed. I think I would put it, you should think about both eroding and exploding, because it has been eroded in the sense that the leading country, the leading liberal country now is withdrawing from all these treaty-related engagements and relying on its own power and self-interest, which seems to be a way of saying international law and international institutions are no longer important in framing international relations or foreign policy. And at the same time, people are much more conscious of the fact that if they want a system of world order that promotes a more peaceful, more sustainable future, and one that's more in accord with human rights and human dignity, it will depend less on governmental transformation than on the activism of civil society, and whether people can develop the means to put pressure on governments to really challenge a geopolitical governed world is something that I think the next 2 decades will definitely show us. And it should be approached, in my view, as a matter of urgency for those who think that the future of the world is an important thing to work to improve, both from a species survival point of view and from the point of view of traditional concerns with peace and justice. Because I think the ecological agenda is also important, as suggesting the terribly reactionary effect of withdrawing from the global climate change treaty and denying the scientific consensus about climate change. It creates a very uncertain future for the species, whether just even putting aside future potentialities of uncontrollable conflict and the use of weapons of mass destruction. So we're living at a time where the peoples of the world are challenged to reinvigorate international law and to make it a more prominent aspect of the way the media covers global events. I mean, it is a challenge of education as well as of activism and political activity. And as I say, I think we're living at a time, more so than I can remember, where the whole future of humanity is at stake. I don't know if I said enough or too much.
I think that was absolutely perfect in all senses. I would strongly recommend people to purchase this online. There are so many passages of your article in here that I could quote, that I could use to ask you more and more. But we've been on for 1 hour and a half, and I don't think we're entitled to exploit you any further. So this has been really a very, very elucidative conversation, Professor Richard Falk. If Paulo and Arthur have nothing more to ask, I would really then like to thank you very much once again for being with us. I think from the beginning to the end, you have given us a very wide range and encompassing view of the situation we're living in at this moment, and with a view also to the urgency of a response from peoples around the global south, from us in Brazil, before it is really too late. I could also quote from your article indications of this, of already the view as stated in the article, which was previous to all this that has happened now from December to January. And so this has been really very rich for us to think about, and for for further actions and conversations inside and outside the university. So thank you very much, Professor Richard.
Good. Well, thank you. It's been an honor and pleasure for me to meet with all of you, and a good learning experience for me.
So hoping to see you soon in person, whenever
Good.
possible. And thank you once again.